She got the eviction notice while still wearing the dress she buried her mother in. Her husband's name was on it. So was the mistress's new address. Her address. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just opened a drawer, pulled out a single folder, and made one phone call. The repast was held in the church hall on Delmar Avenue, the same hall where Imani had attended Sunday school as a little girl, where she had learned her first scripture verses and eaten her first slice of sweet potato pie, made by church mothers with soft hands and warm voices. The wooden floors were the same. The smell of candles and collard greens and something quiet and holy was the same. But Imani was not the same little girl anymore. She was 44 years old, standing near the food table in a black dress that still carried the cold of the cemetery, greeting people who had come to say goodbye to her mother, Celestine. And she was holding herself together the way a woman holds herself together when she has decided that she will not fall, not here, not in front of people, not today. There is a specific kind of loneliness that lives inside a public grief. Everyone around you knows something is wrong, and no one knows quite what to do with that knowledge, so they bring food and they say the right words, and they move on back to their own lives. And you are left standing in the middle of a room full of people, feeling like the loneliest person in any room you have ever been in. Imani knew that loneliness well. She had been practicing it for the better part of 2 years, quietly, the way she had learned to practice most difficult things, with precision and without complaint. People came to her one by one and took her hands and told her that Celestine had been a good woman, a strong woman, a woman who loved the Lord and loved her daughter. Imani thanked each one of them. She kept her voice steady. She kept her eyes dry. She had been doing this for 3 days, holding, steadying, thanking, and she had gotten very good at it. Kwame arrived 40 minutes after the repast started. He did not apologize for being late. He walked in wearing a dark jacket he had not pressed well enough, and he moved through the room like a man who had somewhere else to be. He kissed Imani on the cheek, a dry, distant thing, barely a touch, and then he found a seat near the back wall and took out his phone. He did not speak to any of Imani's family. He did not bring flowers. He sat with his phone and his absence, and he was more gone than the people who had not come at all. His mother Gloria arrived shortly after him. Gloria was a tall woman with a church hat she wore like a crown, and opinions she distributed like gospel. She moved through the room with the energy of someone who had come to evaluate rather than mourn, touching tablecloths, glancing at food arrangements, nodding slowly in a way that was not approval. She gave Imani a brief hug that communicated nothing warm, and then she drifted toward the family section where she began her real work. Whispering. Imani watched her out of the corner of her eye. She had learned years ago how to watch Gloria without appearing to watch her. What Imani had noticed most about Gloria from the very beginning was not what she said, but what she communicated underneath the saying of it. A constant low current of evaluation that never quite became warmth. Gloria had looked at Imani across the dinner table on that very first evening, back when she and Kwame were newly dating, with the careful eyes of a woman who had already formed her conclusion and was only tolerating the evidence. She had asked polite questions and given polite answers, and communicated through every small pause and careful glance that Imani was welcome to be in this family the way a guest is welcome, provisionally, temporarily, at the pleasure of those who actually belonged. Kwame's sister Denise was there too, standing near the beverage table in a yellow blouse that was wrong for a repast and too cheerful for grief. Denise had never liked Imani. She had never worked hard to hide it. She spoke to her cousin Terrell in a voice she did not bother to lower, and what she said landed in Imani's ears clean and sharp, the way cruelty always does when it is not trying to be subtle. She said that Kwame had already moved on, that the woman sleeping in Imani's house knew how to treat a man the right way, and that Imani had only herself to blame. She laughed a little at the end. Terrell glanced at Imani. Denise did not. Imani's closest friend, Adize, was standing 2 feet away when it happened. Adize was a small woman with large eyes that missed nothing, and what she saw across Imani's face in that moment, a flicker, a tightening, and then a smoothing over so complete it was almost frightening, made Adize reach out and touch Imani's arm without saying a word. Imani looked at her. She gave a small, tight smile. She went back to greeting people. Kwame left before the hall was cleaned. He did not say goodbye. He did not ask if Imani needed a ride. She watched his car pull away from the narrow window, above the kitchen sink, her hands in warm dish soap, her face as still as the surface of a deep lake in winter. One of the church mothers came to help her dry. They worked in silence for a while, and the church mother did not ask any questions because she had been alive long enough to know when a woman needed quiet more than she needed words. It was later, when the hall had emptied and Imani was gathering her coat from the chair near the door, that she found the folded note tucked under the lining. It was written in Gloria's particular handwriting, angular, deliberate, the kind of writing that was used to getting what it asked for. It read, "This house was never yours. It is time you accepted that." Imani read it once. She folded it carefully, as if it were something worth keeping. She placed it in her purse. Then she put on her coat and walked out into the cold evening air. Her phone buzzed once inside her bag. When she finally checked it, the screen read, "Geneva office, quarterly report ready." She silenced it without reading further, tucked the phone away, and walked to her car. Nobody standing in that parking lot could have known what that notification meant. Nobody there knew enough about Imani to ask. That was the thing about carrying something quietly for long enough. After a while, it becomes invisible. And so did she. Before there was the church hall and the yellow blouse and the note tucked under a coat, there was a small house in rural Georgia and a woman named Celestine who could sew a buttonhole so tight and clean it looked like something a machine had done. Celestine raised Imani alone, on the income from her seamstress work and the small vegetable garden behind the house and the occasional catering job she took on weekends. They did not have much, but they had enough, and Celestine was careful to make sure Imani understood the difference between those two things. Celestine had a leather journal she kept on the nightstand beside her bed. It was brown and worn soft from years of handling, and it was full of things: financial notes, scripture verses, recipes, small observations about the world that Celestine wrote down because she believed that writing a thing made it more real. She let Imani read it sometimes, not all of it, just the parts she thought Imani was ready for. One entry Imani read when she was 14 had 3 words underlined twice at the bottom of the page: "Patience builds power." She did not fully understand it then. She would not forget it. Imani was a quiet child who noticed everything. She watched how her mother managed money, how she separated it into envelopes, how she tracked every dollar in and every dollar out, how she made something from what other people would have called nothing. She watched how her mother moved through a world that did not always treat her gently, and how she moved through it anyway, upright and deliberate, without broadcasting her pain to people who had not earned the right to witness it. These were not lessons Celestine sat Imani down and formally taught her. They were things Imani absorbed through proximity and love, and years of watching a woman refuse to be diminished. She earned a full scholarship to a business school 3 states away and graduated at the top of her class in a ceremony Celestine attended in a new dress she had sewn herself. Imani built her first small investment account while still a student, working nights and weekends, saving money that most people her age spent on things that disappeared. By the time she was 30, she had built something real. By 35, it had grown into something that required attorneys and offshore accounts and a board of advisors who flew in from 3 different continents. She kept all of it separate from her personal life, not from shame and not from strategy, but because her mother had taught her that a woman's full worth did not need to be on display to be real. She met Kwame at a fundraiser in Atlanta when she was 31. He was charming the way certain men are charming, loudly and immediately, filling a room with his presence and his laugh. He told stories well. He was handsome in a broad, confident way. He made Imani laugh in the first conversation, which was something very few people could do. She liked him genuinely. She chose him with her whole heart and her open eyes, and for a long time she did not regret it. They married in a small ceremony with her mother in the front row, and his family filling the right side of the church. And for the first years the marriage was warm and hopeful the way early things are. When two people are still discovering each other and the discovering feels like something worth protecting. Kwame was a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm. He made a decent living. He was good at what he did. But he was a man who needed to feel like the provider of the life he was living, needed it the way some men need to be the tallest person in a room, even when nobody is measuring. It was something deep in him, placed there long before Imani arrived, and she saw it early. When he made assumptions about who was carrying the household, she let them stand. When he began to believe that his income was the foundation of their comfort, she did not correct him. She told herself it kept the peace. She told herself it was kindness. Over the years, the story Kwame told himself about their marriage became more elaborate. He began to speak about their life in ways that put him at the center of every good thing in it. He made decisions about the house, the cars, their social calendar without asking Imani's view, because he had decided that the man who provides also decides. And he believed himself completely to be that man. His mother Gloria encouraged this. She had always believed that a husband's authority should be visible and uncontested, and she treated any evidence of Imani's independence as a quiet insubordination. She once told Kwame within Imani's hearing that a woman who kept things from her husband was a woman who could not be trusted. Imani heard that and said nothing. She went into the kitchen and started the dishes, and listened to the sound of her own breathing, and thought about the difference between privacy and secrecy, and about how rarely the people who talked the loudest about trust demonstrated any real understanding of what trust is built from. She thought all of that, quietly, alone at the kitchen sink. Then she dried her hands and went back into the living room and asked if anyone wanted more coffee. That was who Imani was. That had always been who she was. The night after the repast, alone in a hotel room because she could not bring herself to go back to the house, Imani sat on the edge of the bed with Celestine's journal open in her lap. The pages smelled faintly of lavender. She read slowly, not looking for anything in particular, just feeling close to her mother in the only way that was still available to her. She turned to an entry from years ago and found those two underlined words again. Patience builds power, and below them, in slightly older ink, a second line she had not remembered. The lamb that stays quiet is not the lamb that is weak. It is the lamb that is waiting. Imani sat with that line for a long time. Then she closed the journal, turned off the lamp, and lay in the dark listening to the city outside the window. She did not cry. She was past crying. She was becoming something else. 3 days after the repast, Imani drove back to the house on Sycamore Lane that she and Kwame had lived in for 11 years. She pulled into the driveway and saw that half the garage was empty. His side, cleared out cleanly, boxes gone, the small shelf where he kept his tools bare. She sat in the car for a moment before going inside. The inside of the house felt like a person who had already decided to leave. Things were missing in ways that were quiet at first, and then louder the longer you looked. His chair, the photograph from the hallway, the kitchen had been gone through. Imani stood in the middle of the living room and understood what she was looking at without needing to be told. She called Kwame's number. He answered on the second ring, and his voice had none of the awkwardness of a man who had been caught. It was flat and final, the voice of a decision already made and settled into. He told her he had filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. He told her the house was in his name. He reminded her of the refinance years ago, a stack of papers she had signed without reading carefully because she trusted him. He told her she had 30 days to make other arrangements. Then he hung up. Gloria called that same evening. She did not begin with condolences for Celestine. She told Imani the house had always been meant to stay in the family, meaning Kwame's family, meaning not Imani. Her voice was warm with a victory she had been waiting a long time to taste. She said 30 days was generous. She said she was sure Imani would land on her feet. Then she said goodbye and hung up before Imani could respond. That was probably intentional. By the following week, Tiffany had moved in. Imani knew this because Tiffany posted about it. She posted photos of the kitchen in the morning light, a caption about fresh starts and new chapters. She posted the living room with a throw blanket Imani had bought draped across the couch, calling the arrangement her aesthetic. Kwame commented a heart on every post. Denise shared one with a caption that said nothing but communicated everything. The world Imani had lived in for 11 years was being redecorated in real time, and the woman doing the redecorating had Imani's address, Imani's pots, Imani's morning window light, and she was calling it hers. A daze drove over the night she saw the posts and said everything that a best friend is supposed to say. Imani listened to all of it patiently, and when Adazi had finished, Imani was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly that she was not going back to that house. Not that way, not to fight for something she had already decided to replace with something better. A few days later, Imani drove to the cemetery alone in the early morning, while the ground was still damp from the night's rain. She found her mother's grave and sat beside it, on the ground, in her good coat, without caring what the damp would do to it. She opened the journal. She read the line again, and something shifted in her face. Not breaking, not softening, but realigning. The way the pieces of something complex finally settle into their right positions after being carried in the wrong arrangement for too long. She stood up. She brushed off her coat. She took out her phone and made a call. When the line connected, she said, "Tell the board I will be in Geneva next week." And then she said, "Get me Robert Langley on the line." Robert Langley was her private attorney, based in a building downtown with no sign on the door. He had worked for Imani for 9 years. Kwame had never once heard his name. She had kept that thread separate, as she had kept most important threads separate, not from hiding, but from the simple knowledge that some things are yours and only yours, and do not need to be shared to be real. She did not tell Adaz what she had set in motion. She went back to the hotel. She ordered room service. She ate slowly. She slept well for the first time in weeks. The Harvest Hope Gala had been held every October for 14 consecutive years at the Crown Ballroom in downtown Atlanta, a black tie event that raised money for education foundations in underserved communities. Kwame and Gloria had attended for years, not because they gave heavily, but because the room was full of people worth being seen by. This year, Kwame arrived with Tiffany on his arm in a red dress, chosen to be noticed. Gloria wore ivory. Denise sat at their upgraded table surrounded by people who had heard Kwame's version of the story and accepted it without question. Kwame had been telling that story everywhere. He had shaped it carefully. Imani had been struggling for years, emotionally unavailable, broken by grief. He was the patient husband who had held on as long as he could. People nodded. They told him he deserved peace. The story had settled into its comfortable shape, and Kwame wore it everywhere like a well-fitted jacket. The ballroom was full and warm, tables dressed in cream and gold, quiet orchestra filling the space. The event was running smoothly through its first hour when the room shifted. It was subtle at first, the way a tide shifts before you notice the water has moved. Heads turned near the entrance. A ripple of recognition spread from the door inward like a held breath. Imani walked in. She was dressed in deep midnight blue, not loud, not theatrical, simply and devastatingly right. She carried Celestine's journal in her satin clutch, a private thing no one in the room would know about, but that she carried anyway because she had earned the right to carry what she chose. She was flanked by two attorneys whose bearing communicated everything about the kind of work they did, and Adaise walked beside her with her chin lifted in the manner of a woman who had been waiting for this particular evening for quite some time. Kwame saw her from across the room. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. Tiffany followed his gaze and found a version of Imani she had not been prepared for. The woman who had just entered the Crown Ballroom in midnight blue with two attorneys and the stillness of someone who had nothing left to prove. That was something else entirely. Tiffany turned to say something to Kwame and found that he had nothing to say. The event host moved to the podium and thanked the room for their generosity. Then he paused. The particular pause of someone about to say something he found genuinely remarkable. He said that this year the gala's lead benefactor, a donor who had funded the event anonymously for 11 consecutive years, had decided for the first time to be known. He said her name, Imani, her full name. Her company name appeared on the screen behind him in clean white letters. Below it, a second line that resolved slowly into a number as the room watched. $40.2 billion in assets under management. Global reach across 6 countries, a portfolio of educational and community development investments that had quietly transformed neighborhoods in 4 American cities over the course of a decade. 11 years. The same 11 years she had been married to Kwame. The same 11 years Gloria had been telling her she had no claim on anything. The room went still in the way rooms go still when they have to recalibrate everything they thought they understood. At Kwame's table no one spoke. Tiffany looked at the screen and then looked at Kwame. His face had done something complicated. The confidence had gone out of it. The whole comfortable architecture of the story he had been living inside, suddenly visible for what it was. A story built on a misunderstanding so large it now looked like a canyon. Gloria sat very straight in her ivory dress, with her hands flat on the table, and said absolutely nothing. Denise reached for her water glass and missed it slightly, catching it with both hands. Imani was brought to the podium. She stood before the room with the ease of a woman who had addressed rooms like this one 100 times, which she had. She spoke warmly about her mother, about a seamstress in rural Georgia, who kept a leather journal and underlined things twice when she really meant them. She talked about what education had meant to a quiet little girl in a small house. She was specific and generous and composed in the way of someone who has survived enough that composure is no longer an effort. She did not look at Kwame's table once. When her remarks ended and the applause was still filling the air, Robert Langley moved through the space between tables with the efficiency of a man who had delivered difficult news before and found no pleasure in the delivering, but no hesitation either. He reached Kwame's table. He placed a sealed legal envelope in front of Kwame. It contained a counterfiling. It contained 11 years of financial documentation establishing that the house on Sycamore Lane had been purchased through a holding company whose assets traced directly to Imani. Kwame's name on the deed was a single line in a much longer document, and that document had been prepared by attorneys who had been building toward exactly this moment for 6 months before Kwame ever filed. She had known the divorce was coming. She had felt it building in the long silences and the short goodbyes and the way he had stopped asking anything real about her life. She had made her preparations quietly, without anger, without drama, without letting him know she had already seen him. She had let him believe he was driving this story all the way until the moment she took the wheel. Kwame opened the envelope. He read the first page slowly. He looked up across the ballroom floor at Imani, who was speaking with the event host. Her back to him, her posture easy. He opened his mouth. She turned. Just once. She looked at him across that distance with the complete stillness of a woman who has nothing left to prove, and she said quietly, just quietly enough that only those nearest heard, "I hope the 30 days was enough time for you." Then she turned back to her conversation, and it was as if he had never spoken at all, because he had not. The consequences did not arrive loudly. That was perhaps the most devastating part of them. There was no single dramatic moment, no public collapse. They arrived the way serious things arrive when they have been building for a long time, quietly, completely, and with a finality that left nothing to negotiate. Kwame's attorney reviewed the financial documentation and called on a Thursday morning to say he was withdrawing from the case. The case was unwinnable. The paper trail was airtight. He had a practice to protect. Kwame spent 2 days searching for another attorney and discovered that several of them had already heard the story. He settled eventually for a man whose office was above a tax preparation storefront and whose confidence exceeded his competence significantly. The house reverted. When it was done, Kwame was left with his car, his personal savings, and a monthly income that had always been modest and now felt much smaller against the backdrop of what the last year had cost him. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city. He did not post about it. Tiffany had been in that ballroom. She had seen the screen. She did her own research the morning after and spent approximately 4 hours sitting with the full weight of what she had helped dismantle. She posted an apology that expressed regret in general terms without naming anyone. It was mocked thoroughly. She deleted it within 12 hours. She deleted the house photos. She stopped answering Kwame's calls after the 6th one and blocked his number after the 22nd. She moved out and sent a goodbye in a text message that took 3 drafts to write and 10 seconds to send. Gloria did not make any public statements, but there was a private reckoning that was perhaps the sharpest of all because it was the most honest. She sat alone in her living room one evening and looked at the wedding photograph that had been on her bookshelf for 11 years. Kwame and Imani on the church steps, young and forward-facing. Gloria had never once in 11 years sat down with Imani and asked who she was. She had made up her mind in the first year and never revised it. She had never asked about her work, her past, her mother, her dreams. She had looked at a woman she did not know and called the looking enough. The cost of that, she was understanding now, had been everything. Denise lost a marketing partnership she had been building for 2 years. She did not know until it dissolved that its key connector had been a colleague of Imani's for a decade. She called Kwame when she found out. He had no comfort to offer. They stayed on the line in silence for a while, which was more honest than most of what they had done lately. There was a particular clarity that came from consequences arriving without being engineered. Imani had not set out to destroy anyone. She had set out to protect what was hers and build what came next. The fact that protecting her own foundation dismantled the false one others had been standing on. That was not something she had planned for. It was just the natural order of things when the truth finally finishes being patient. Imani did not call any of them. She did not send messages. She had not built the last 9 months around making them feel the weight of what they had done. She had built it around building the next chapter of her own life. The weight found them on its own. It always does. The new house was on a quiet street in a neighborhood with old trees that met overhead in the middle of the road. It was smaller than the house on Sycamore Lane, which had never felt entirely hers anyway. But every room in this one had been chosen by her alone, arranged by her, filled with things that were entirely and unambiguously hers. The kitchen had a wide window that faced east and caught the morning light in a way that made the whole room golden for about 40 minutes each day. Imani had learned this in the first week and started waking up early to sit in it. Adaize came on a Saturday morning, a few weeks after the move was complete. They sat at the kitchen table in that golden light and talked the way women talk when they have survived something together and the surviving is finally behind them. Adaize made Imani laugh until she had to set her coffee cup down so she would not spill it. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and unheld, the kind Imani had not let herself have in a very long time. She drove to the cemetery in the late afternoon with yellow flowers, because Celestine had always said yellow was the color of things still growing. She placed them carefully against the stone, which had been installed now clean and real, bearing her mother's full name and the years that had contained her remarkable life. Imani stood there for a long while. The sun was low, the cemetery was nearly empty. She told her mother, in the way you tell the dead what you need them to know, that she was all right. She said it simply, without decoration, without needing anyone to confirm it. She said she was building something and it felt like the right kind of building. She said she had kept the journal. She said she read it still. She said goodbye and walked back to her car across the grass that was just beginning to turn. The light was low and gold, and the whole cemetery had the stillness of a place that has made peace with what it holds. She did not hurry. She walked slowly, the way her mother had always walked, like someone who knew where she was going and did not need to rush the arriving. That evening she made herself a quiet dinner and set the table properly. Cloth napkin, the good dishes, a single candle, because Celestine had believed that a woman should treat herself like company worth having. She ate slowly. She listened to music she liked. When she was done, she washed the dishes by hand, dried them, put them away, and stood in the clean kitchen in the evening quiet of her own home, and felt something she had not felt in years. She felt like herself, fully and completely like herself, the way you feel when something that was always true about you has finally been allowed to take up its proper space in the world without apology. She went to the windowsill in the study where she had placed Celestine's journal when she first moved in, wanting it to be the first thing she settled in its right place. She picked it up, felt its familiar worn weight. She did not open it. She set it back in the patch of evening light. She looked at it for a moment, at its soft cover, its worn edges, all those years of a woman's careful thinking pressed between its pages. Then she walked away toward the open door at the end of the hall and did not look back. Some people spend their whole lives trying to break a woman who was never actually breakable. They just couldn't see what she was made of, because she never needed them to. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you are new here, subscribe, because every story we tell is for the ones who stayed quiet and kept going.